1 Corinthians 14:34 makes one of the strongest arguments for the need of small groups, but usually isn't read or used in that way. So let's take a look. 1 Corinthians 14:34. Women should be silent during the church meetings. It is not proper for them to speak. So what does that have to do with small groups and their needs? Well, actually a lot. For one, passages like this are taken out of context all the time. Remember when we talked about church having a teaching element? Well, in the early church, just like in the modern church, when the teaching time would come, the speaker was to be given time to finish their message without interruption. In the ancient world, women were so devalued that they'd been excluded almost entirely from public gatherings. This expulsion of women, though, was entirely incompatible with Jesus' teachings. So of course, women couldn't be prevented from participating any longer. Just a few chapters earlier, Paul instructed women on how they should pray and even prophesy during church. So they were certainly vocal participants. Paul allowed women to speak. Being new to participation, however, there was a debate about when it was appropriate to speak up, and the women were interrupting church speakers with their questions. Now, imagine if a group of people completely unfamiliar with our etiquette started coming to CCV and were interrupting the pastor every few minutes into the sermon. Well, that's unacceptable. So Paul, the guy who founded the Corinthian church, wrote them a letter ending the debate and making it really clear to this new group in attendance that no, you absolutely may not speak during the church meetings. Now, there are two important things I want to zero in on here. One, people have questions. A one-sided conversation is not enough to truly understand God. We can't interrupt our pastor during the sermon time, but we do need a place for back and forth dialogue. It's how we flesh out our ideas. How are we supposed to figure out how to apply what it is we're learning? What if we're struggling in our life related to the topics and we need support? What if God did some amazing thing in and through you that you want to share? What if I need to hear that story as it relates to my own life? What if I'm just lonely? The small group answers this. It's our time to dig into the topic, to share our thoughts, opinions, insights, and more. The weekend sermon is not enough. You have a voice, and you need to use it as much for you as those around you. If you're wondering it, the odds are there are people sitting right next to you wondering the same thing. When you bring it up, you are actively accomplishing what groups were designed for. But make sure to save it for the small group. We don't speak up and interrupt the pastor. At CCV, we should all be silent during the church meeting. Now, let's take a look at the second point. Sometimes Scripture, when presented in certain ways, actually drives people away from God. Right now, there's someone trying to figure out who Jesus is to them. They're trying to figure out if they believe in him or if they even like him at all. Passages like this one that we just talked about might not come up in sermons too often, but people will run across them. If people don't have a safe place to speak their mind and to be heard, well, they'll leave. And if they leave over misunderstandings or misrepresentations, as believers, that's on us. We have women pastors, we have women group leaders, we have women worship leaders, and more. That's because at CCV, we're willing to explore these passages to figure out what Scripture is really saying. Truth has nothing to fear from exposure. So if Jesus Christ is actually true, no topic at CCV should be off limits. Just imagine how many amazing women would have walked away from their calling if our attitude was avoidant or defensive. See, if we only do half church, we don't create intentional environments to get to talk about these things. Loving God with all our minds means it's not enough for us to just be told what we believe. Knowing what we believe and why we believe it is the culmination of many things, and right up there at the top is dialogue, hence our need for the small group.